Okay. The board just returned from closed session and no action was taken. This time I will do roll call. Mr. Bell? Present. Mrs. Carroll? Here. Dr. Finley?
Present.
Mrs. Gu is absent today, and Reina Diaz is here. I will call this meeting to order at 7:02.
7:02.
Thank you. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bell.
Second.
Second by Dr. Finley. Any item to discuss? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Everyone, with the exception of Mrs. Good, that is absent today. I will ask the birthday person today to please lead us on the flag salute. Mr. Crosby.
Oh, wow.
Please rise. Put your hand over your heart. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. We will now move to request the address the board.
There are no requests to address the board, Madam President.
Thank you. And item 8.1, presentation of school consolidation.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd ask, back of the house, can you queue up, it's the thought exchange presentation, please? Thank you. So good evening to members of the board and members of the community. Tonight, staff will present two presentations. We're going to start the presentation. The first presentation is going to be a review of the thought exchange feedback. And so many of you will know or remember that the board has been engaged in this conversation for several months now regarding school consolidation. Going back to a preliminary presentation that happened in the month of September, and one of the things that we knew that we wanted to do throughout this process is to make sure that we were engaging folks and getting feedback. And so we used Thought Exchange as our platform for soliciting community-based feedback, staff-based feedback. And so what you see before you tonight on the screens is a Thought Exchange exercise that was held between the dates of November the 28th through December the 7th. It's culminated actually last evening with a community forum that happened at Doherty High School. And I do recognize and see many of members of the community that were there last night are also here this evening as well. And so we want to just share some of the insights and some of the things that we saw here, but I do want to also share there's a comprehensive report. There are two reports that are going to be published on our district website tomorrow morning. And the first one is going to be the Thought Exchange feedback that was a result of the conversations that we had with each of the potentially affected school sites, and then also the community member feedback Thought Exchange as well. So both of those links will be made available on the district website in the morning. Next slide, please. So the very first one, this is the feedback that came from our community. And so the question that we asked was to please share your thoughts on school consolidation and what are the benefits, what are some of the challenges. And so the data that you see on the screen, there were 434 participants. There were 514 authentic thoughts. So if you go onto the Thought Exchange platform, you're on your smart device, you can see the question, and then you can actually just share any response or any thought that you have about that particular question. So there were 514 thoughts, and then there were over 10,798 ratings. So once you put in a thought, then it shows you thoughts of other people, and then you can score each of those thoughts on a ranking of from 1 star to 5 stars. And so what you'll see, the data breakdown here is that it does show the representation from different areas within the district. 8% were representatives from representing Duarte Preschool, 16% from Andres Duarte, 41% from Beardsley, 4% from Maxwell, 22% from Royal Oaks, 16% from Valley View, 20% from Doherty High School, and 2% from Mount Olive. And then the breakdown on who were the respondents, 67% were identified as parent or guardians, 18% were students, and 15% were community member or other staff. Next slide, please. So these are the top 5 ranked thoughts. And I just will read them verbatim because I know that the print is a little bit small on the screen. So the first one, and it got a rating of 4.5, which is instead of focusing on consolidating schools, the board/district should focus on how to improve enrollment. As parents, we want our children to attend the best schools to provide the best opportunities to support them overall. The second thought was distance of picking up and dropping off students from their home school. Certain schools do not have enough space for drop-off and pickup, commute times for parents and or caregivers in their daily life and schedule, especially for families that have multiple kids who go to different schools. And so I want to, again, just resituate that this is in response to the question, what are the things that we should be considering about school consolidation? And what are the things that we need to be mindful of? The third highest ranked thought, Duarte schools seem to be focusing their money into schools that promote higher income families and intentionally reducing spending on other schools. For years, the city of Duarte and DUSD have failed the community by making partner deals that profit companies versus benefiting the community. So that was also a highly ranked thought. The fourth is consolidation increases class size, which decreases the quality of education that students receive. A small student to instructor ratio is most effective. And the fifth ranked thought was challenges are going to be oversized classrooms for certain classrooms/grades. Concerns are also include teacher to student ratio. I value the educational experience my child receives, and I do not want to dilute that with an oversized classroom/teacher who cannot tend to her or his kids. Next slide, please. So the top 10 themes by number of different thoughts. So you'll see that connection to school, friends, and teachers was the top ranked theme. Second is class size, campus crowding, impact on families, transportation, and traffic. And you'll see the rest that go down the list. There are several components of this as I go through this presentation that we will address in the second presentation. There's information about many of the things that were listed as questions or concerns within the Thought Exchange platform. So continuing down the list, neighborhood, equity and safety, budget spending decisions, current data, communication, trust, impact on students, changing schools, disruption, special education, middle school program arrangement, and dual immersion program. Those were the top themed thoughts. Next slide. So then when you take and you rank them by the actual score that they received, the highest average ranking were the themes of current data, communication, and trust. We'll certainly address questions about current data in tonight's presentation. The second highest average stars were the dual immersion program. Next was class size, campus crowding, facilities, renovations, and bonds, the impact on employees, impact on families, transportation and traffic, neighborhood, equity and safety, special education, more special education, impact on students, changing schools, and the disruption. Next slide, please. So then we also had, can you go back one for me? Thank you. We also had the very same, similar conversation with each of the staffs of the potentially impacted school sites. And so my team went out and spoke with the staff at Andrews Duarte, spent about an hour and a half engaging the staff in a Q&A session, but also inviting them into the Thought Exchange platform as well. And so this is the staff input that we received from Andrews Duarte and Beardsley. Next slide, please. And so the input from Andrews Duarte staff, there were 35 participants, there were 57 thoughts, and 643 rankings. The input from the Beardsley staff, there were 37 participants, 73 thoughts, and 514 rankings. Next slide. Next slide, please. So the top 5 ranked thoughts that came from the school site staffs. Building a school environment that duplicates the offerings at Royal Oaks is important, but tailored to the student population. Our students at the middle school, our students at the middle level at Southern schools are not getting a true middle school experience. That came from Andrews Duarte. Royal Oaks gets a remodel, filtered drinking water fountain, and AD gets nothing. Maxwell got new rooms, AD got nothing, Beardsley got some new rooms. We as a staff feel slighted now that there are talks about closing. It all just seems by design to ignore AD over the years and now close us down. The next thought is, I currently am in the meeting with Dr. Emerson, and all of this is being discussed. I only know that the last 4 years, but many other things are discussed. The KA model is not working. There needs to be a middle school in the district. There is no growth mentally in this model. There are no facilities. The next thought was current data from the present. Total School Solution has not presented any information that is accurate. Everything that they have presented was from 2016. Next one is there should be input from certificated and classified staff. We are the people who will be affected by this, not the district office. Next slide, please. So the top 10 themes by number of different thoughts. Impact on programs, impact on staff, middle school programs, family and equity, financial considerations and enrollment, communication and transparency, facilities, neighborhood location, current data, school climate, and students. Next slide. So the top 10 themes by ranking of thoughts. So this is the average star score. The most important was to look at current data, to focus on facilities, school climate, impact on programs, students, communication and transparency, neighborhood and location, families and equity, financial considerations and enrollment, and impacts on staff. Next slide. Oh, sorry, so that's the final slide. So what this really is, and I invite all of you to visit our district's website to see the comprehensive report that can break out all of the data and all of this information. The most important thing that I want to share is that this information is very, very helpful for us to continue to refer to and use as a roadmap for our process moving forward, whatever the board direction and decision is. This provides really good impact, really good feedback, really good information for us as a staff to make sure that we're working with our principals and working with our faculty and staff across all our schools to make sure that we account for the things that have been voiced, not only by the staffs that may be impacted, but also by the community at large. So I'm going to ask back of the house if you can transition to the other presentation. And I'll pause there to just ask, Madam President, if you would like, or the board would like to ask any questions about what I've shared thus far.
I'd just like to know if this information is available in Spanish too.
Dr. Hillman, the comprehensive reports are both in English and in Spanish. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions? No? Okay.
Okay. So the next presentation is a follow-up of the series of presentations that we have shared with the community thus far. And so if you can go to the next slide for me. So the topics for discussion in this evening's presentation is a recap of the process. We're going to talk about enrollment. We're going to talk about district financials. We're going to look at local data analysis, and this is an updated look at the RPAC metrics. We're going to do additional data considerations, final comments, and a board question and answer session. Next slide. So this is the work that's been completed thus far in 2021. There's been a review and analysis of all the information and data produced by the RPAC. The RPAC work was used as much as feasible. We've done a review of any facilities changes since 2016, an analysis of the historical 2016 till 2021 enrollment history, enrollment data, development of a class-by-class and school-by-school enrollment projections, review of facilities plans and programmatic changes, several meetings with the district administration and staff, and at least 6 meetings with the superintendent's cabinet, legal counsel, and our consultants. So recap of the progress and the potential next steps. So on September 16th, the first boundary study presentation was done. On September 22nd, we represented that same boundary study presentation a second time. There were some technical difficulties that we experienced on the 16th, so we came back and represented that again. Then on November 10th, we did a second boundary study presentation. On November 17th, we had a principal engagement session where we met with all of our school site principals across the entire district, elementary, K-8, as well as secondary, and provided a listening session to get their feedback and their input. That's been a part of this ongoing discussion. On November the 30th, we met with the potentially impacted staff for listening sessions at the 2 respective campuses. On December the 7th, there was a community input listening session that was held at Duarte High School last evening. December 8th, this evening, we are presenting the staff presentation on consolidation. And then potentially on December 16th, there will be a staff recommendation that goes to the Board of Education. Next slide. So just to situate this conversation and to think about it in the broader sense, like many districts in California, our district is facing a set of difficult circumstances. What we know is that enrollment has continued to decline year over year, and at this point, decade over decade. And as a result of that declining enrollment, we've been presented with significant budgetary challenges that have become more and more imminent post-COVID. The reality is that the budget is getting more and more challenging. And what we also know is that major facilities needs have been completed as a result of program needs. And so there was, after the RPAC, after the 2016 RPAC, there was a comprehensive community-based process that developed the district's strategic plan. Many of you may have been a part of that process. It was the development of the Competitive Advantage Plan. And out of that Competitive Advantage Plan, there was the redesign of the instructional program to move from being a traditional elementary, middle school, high school district to ostensibly being a K-8 high school district. So the TK through grade 8 educational programs, we recognize, and this is in the Thought Exchange data, and we have been looking at this and really thinking hard about it, is that there's a need to reevaluate the TK through grade 8 model. And what does that look like to increase and enhance the services and the programs, the breadth and scope of the options and opportunities for our students at the middle school grades? That is something that is front and center for us. And as a result of the issues above, we believe that a fresh look at all aspects of the district is required. Next slide. So back in 2016, the board made a promise to the community that they would not consider closing any elementary school for 5 years. And so no consideration of school use changes occurred for that 5-year period. And so at this point, the district is bringing forward a discussion on school facilities and student housing now in the current 2021-2022 school year. So the promise was made, and the promise was kept to keep that at bay for 5 years. So I want to go back and do a little bit of a recap and a little bit of review of some things that you may have seen already, but I just want to make sure that for those who may be new to this conversation and maybe haven't seen this information, I just want to share it again. But this is the historic enrollment of our TK through 5 or TK through 8 schools. As you can see, from 2016-17 up through this year, you can see the enrollment trends and patterns at each of our school sites. And this is slightly different because at that time, when this data was initially collected, Northview had the village that was housing specifically middle school and then just specifically 8th grade students in that final year. But if you look at the trajectory of historic enrollment across the district, you will see that the total of the K-8, the 5 schools, you'll see that in 2016 we had 2,398 students. And then you see growth. You see growth and some additional enhancements that happened enrollment-wise across the district. And that can be attributed to the partnership program with California School of the Arts San Gabriel Valley. And so you'll see the numbers go up in 2017-18. The numbers continue to go up in 2018-19. You see the numbers taper back off in 2019-20. And then you start to see the COVID-19, the pandemic, hits us in 2020-21. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we also have been looking at is what is the potential for enrollment increases, and what does that look like on a projected basis in the next several years? And so if you look at where we currently are situated right now, with respect to projected enrollment, you'll see the numbers here in 2021-22 at 2,398, and you will see that by 2025-26, projected enrollment looks to go up from 2,398 to 2,463. Most notably, you will see under the line item for Andres Duarte that it currently is projected for this year, the projected enrollment for this year should be at 346, and it grows from 346 to 467. You'll see that Beardsley is fairly flat, starting at 420, and it's projected to be at 402. You'll see Maxwell is fairly flat as well, starting at 436 and projected out at 417. See that Royal Oaks also has a little bit of a downtick, starting right now at 752, projecting at 664 in 2025, 2026, with an augment with respect to a large percentage of the students in the California School of the Arts Partnership Program do attend Royal Oaks. And then Valley View, you'll see that its enrollment projection at 369 this year remains very, very steady and very flat at 363 in 25, 26. Next slide, please. So going from enrollment projections to current enrollment as of November the 30th, 2021, and this is what enrollment looks like. At Andrews Duarte, we have current enrollment of 303 students, Beardsley 386, Maxwell 396, Royal Oak 785, Valley View 341. So the total current enrollment is 2,211, and our projected enrollment for this year should be 2,398 for a net difference of 187 students negative. And if you put that in dollars and cents terms, being down 187 students is equivalent to $1.87 million of less funding as a result of the decline. Next slide, please. So when we situate this in the broader context of the district's financials, what you see on the screen is the 2021-22 adopted budget numbers. So you'll see our revenues at the adopted budget for this year are just north of $50 million. Our expenses are at $49.5 million. We had a fund balance of $795,000. We had an ending fund balance of $2.74 million. The 3% reserve is $1.5 million, and our total reserves overall, $1.9 million. So let me explain, because there's also some things that are important to note on this particular slide. A lot of this information, a lot of the numbers that you see here have the benefit of having additional COVID relief dollars that are one-time stimulus dollars that have come into the district's finances. So when you look at the 2022-23 projections and the 23-24 projections, you'll see that our revenues start to decline dramatically. So revenues are at $43 million, $33.8 million in 22-23, and then $44 million in 23-24. You will also see that our expenses projected for this year are at $49.5 million, and you'll see that we are projecting that we are going to be cutting expenses by several million dollars over the next couple of years. With that still being said, the broader challenges that we have that I just shared on the previous slide is even while we are cutting, we're working to cut and reduce expenses, that imbalance that I just showed on the previous slide with negative 187 students is a $1.8 million shortfall of additional funds that we would have hoped to have received. And so what we also recognize is that when those COVID stimulus dollars do roll off of the district's budget, we will have continuing challenges with budgetary shortfalls and issues related to ongoing revenues and ongoing expenditures. Next slide. So there was a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion about the RPAC. So just again, a recap and a little history. The RPAC was constituted in 2016. They were charged as a broad group of community individuals from across the district and across the city and across the district's boundaries to come together and go through an analysis of all of the district's elementary properties. And so at the board's direction, the staff was, at the board's direction, as a result of using that RPAC data as a preliminary analysis and roadmap, we were tasked with providing updated information to make sure that the current information is also a part of the consideration. And so some of the key takeaways, and we're going to go through each of those RPAC metrics meticulously in the subsequent slides, but some of the key takeaways, the fundamentals that were in existence in 2016 have not changed in 2021. The district continues to decline in enrollment. Schools are enrolled under capacity. So operationally and facilities-wise, we are not operating at our most efficient mode. And then there are programmatic benefits to reorganizing that remain. So there are ways that we think we can enhance and increase what we do and how we deliver value and education to our kids. We think there are ways to do that by looking at reorganizing. Next slide, please. Sorry, one second, please. Okay. So the RPAC developed a series of objectives. And if I remember correctly off the top of my head, they're numbered on the slides. I think there were 14 total objectives. And then those objectives were ranked into levels of importance. And so what I did was I just simply took the same exact RPAC metrics and the objectives that the RPAC looked at and just looked at it from a current status. And so the very first, there were 2 bullets under optimized conditions for student success, the number of students enrolled per grade level, and the average class size that exists. Now, before we go to the next slide, I also want to explain that the way that this presentation is structured and formatted is different than the way that the RPAC went about it. The RPAC provided data, and then they took the data, and then they weighted the data based on the category, and then they scored it. We are not weighting the data, and we are not scoring the data. What we are simply providing you is an unbiased delivery of what the data is. We're not scoring it because it is not my attempt to pit one school versus the other. It's just a fair analysis of the data as the data is presented. So next slide, please. This is a breakdown of our data as of CBEDS for last year. Okay, CBEDS for last year. So what I mean by CBEDS, let me just clarify. CBEDS is taken in October of every year. So in 2020, 2021, and there is an asterisk because in 2020, 2021, we were dealing with COVID-19. But these are the numbers for our students enrolled per grade level for each school site. And so you'll see total by grade level for each school site, and then total enrollment across the bottom. So enrollment at CBEDS for Andrews Duarte, 298. Enrollment for Beardsley, 384. Enrollment for Maxwell, 382. Enrollment for Royal Oak, 675. Enrollment for Valley View, 341. Now what you'll also see that's really, really important is you'll see the kinder enrollment. There's a kinder enrollment of 213 during the last year in this last CBED period. When we look at the total number of high school graduates in our district, it was 214. So we essentially are graduating the same number as kinder students that we bring in. So why is that a challenge? Well, it's a challenge because if you're not bringing in large numbers of kinders, that's replenishing your student population on an annual basis because you know every single year you're going to lose graduates. So you're going to have graduates leave your system, and what you want to do is you want to replenish those graduates with the youngest group possible, which are your kinders. And if you have a 1-to-1 or somehow an imbalanced ratio, you have a challenge. And then if you have any other mitigating factors that where you have students that you're losing or students are declining in enrollment across the district, it's further complicated and further challenged. And so these numbers make it really, really, really difficult to continue to operate schools with very, very low numbers. And then also the low number of kinders, we know there was some thinking that we may get a boom of kinders in about 4 or 5 years, because people thought that when everybody was at home during COVID, maybe lots of people would maybe make babies. We don't think that's happening. It's not my opinion. It's statistically, we're talking to folks that are in the forecasting space, and we don't think that there's going to be a huge baby bump in a couple of years from now. So next slide, please. So when we look at average class size, and I want to pause here and I want to talk a little bit about this because this is something that's really, really heavily discussed in the thought exchange data. totally understand that people would not want to have overcrowded schools, overcrowded classrooms. But when you fairly look at our data, and you fairly look at the average class size over multiple years, so this runs 2017-18, 18-19, and 19-20, you see our class sizes across the district are fairly low. And in some cases as low as 18 and a half, and on the upper end as high as 26 and a half. Because of the fact that we have a fairly small geographically sized district, and because multiple places where our schools are located are fairly in close proximity to one another, we think that we could, as the board deliberates and thinks about this, we think we can distribute, redistribute, or reallocate students in an equitable way to not severely overcrowd or severely overpack any particular individual school. And you see that, again, at the elementary level and also at the secondary level, the class sizes across the district, across all campuses, are fairly low. Next slide. And Madam President, if you all want me to stop or answer specific questions on specific slides, please let me know. I'll just keep rolling, but if you want me to stop, let me know.
It's up to the board if you want to have questions, so wait until the end.
You're doing well, sir.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I do have questions. Would it be better to take them as they come?
It's completely at the board's discretion.
You know, I want to ask one thing. I think the volume for the people that are listening online isn't being heard as well. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, I said, I think the volume on, if people are looking online isn't that high, so it needs to go up, bump it up, or I'm not sure if there's.
Marcelo just gave me some signal from the room.
Okay. No,
But are they having problem
No,
hearing
we
me?
can't
Because
hear.
I'm trying to stay right over the
yeah,
mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not for the people in the room, talking about the people who are streaming.
Yeah.
So Marcelo, are we good back in the back house? Okay,
Okay,
all right, very good.
Okay.
So back to you, Dr. Finley?
Yeah, so I guess I had some questions about, I don't know, I guess it's the slides with the projected enrollment going out as far as the 25-26 year.
Mm-hmm.
So how did these numbers become the way they are? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering how we got these projections.
Joe, would you like to talk about how we get projected enrollment for multiple years forward? Again, we do have Dr. Pandolfo from Total School Solutions, as well as Serene Abrahamian, who is counsel to the district.
Yeah, so there's a professional demographer with our firm who will take a look at projection trends district-wide throughout the grade levels and come up with an analysis of, between cohort survival and, statistically how many students are likely to go on to the next grade level. And so that's all done, to see what the projected enrollment look like. And then going backwards, they look at live birth rates, look at zip codes that attend the district, and look at percentages that actually and historically have been here, and come up with the projections. So so when they do this, of course, the projections are usually they're exactly wrong and approximately right. So of course, the trends are what are really the big thing. And in this case, the trends are diminishing enrollment, and actually the trend is diminishing greater than what the demographer had projected for this current year, by quite a bit. I think it was 187 students. Because, when the demographer does that, he doesn't know who is going to enroll. That's not known until CBEDS, which is the October benchmark. In November was pretty close to that, so I'm sure it's very similar.
Thank you. And just one of the things that just in related to these projected data here at the CSBA meeting this past weekend, the number one county in the state of California that was expected to see a decline in the number of students was Los Angeles County. It was projected by 2031 we would have it was 19.98% decrease, so almost 20% decrease in student population in LA County, of which we are a part. So yeah, I'm just I'm heartened to see that a lot of these numbers are flat and not dropping by huge amounts. But one follow-up question on these projected numbers. You know, in our district, we do allow families to choose which schools they would like to attend. Are these numbers here based on who lives in a school's boundaries, or historically where families choose to attend, or how is that taken into account with these numbers?
Yeah, like in the case of Andres Duarte Elementary School, all the students from the new housing that are projected were assigned to that school, and it was reported that that's not the trend for that area. There's a lot of transfer outs, but in this case, the demographer assigned them all to that school just to try to remain consistent, because it's really not known where they'll actually enroll. And the other thing I should point out too is that if this projection were to be done again, the enrollment for this year is lower than what was projected. And of course, anytime the demographer is working on the projections, that they're using like the best, the most recent data as the basis. So that would re-benchmark the whole projection downward. So what you're seeing, in the projection, that was presented in September looks to me to be optimistic from what I'm seeing, in your recent enrollment trends.
Thank you very much.
Since we're asking questions, I wanted to go back a little further, and with the competitive advantage plan, why we went through K through 8 in the first place, because I think that would be the questions why, that was really on the thought exchange. I should have asked that question earlier, but how parents said, oh, we should have a middle school. So what was the reason behind the K through 8 model?
Through extensive data analysis, there was evidence that showed that one of the biggest challenges with enrollment retention was at the middle school. And so there was data that showed that there was a substantial number of students that were leaving the district once they were to matriculate to Northview Middle School. That was before my time in the district, but that was the information, and that was the basis for a decision to repurpose that campus, develop the partnership, and as a result of that initial analysis, and then through the comprehensive competitive advantage plan design and structure, the K-8 model was a result of that. It was one of the key strategies within the competitive advantage plan, and it was ostensibly to create a K-8 model structured around retention and connecting with families, and potentially creating the value proposition of a family that has a kinder, a second, and a sixth grader, and all go to the same place. And if they have a first grader, a eighth grader, and a third grader, they're all going to the same place. There was a method to my madness here, but I kind of tripped over myself here. But the point is trying to help families all go to the same place all the way through high school. And then also attaching to each of those sites a thematic magnet type approach of instructional design. Arts at Andres Duarte, dual language immersion at Beardsley, International Baccalaureate at Maxwell, creative technology and innovation at Valley View, and STEAM at Royal Oaks. So that was how it designed and how it happened, and that's why the decision was made to move from being a traditional elementary, middle school, high school design, and rather a K-8 high school design.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to continue on. The second component of the RPAC, the second objective, was maximizing student enrollment through attracting, retaining, and recovery. So the metrics that the RPAC looked at in 2016 were total student capacity and program availability. So the next slide. Our total capacity, what we have shared with the board and the community previously, is that we have identified excess capacity exists within our schools. And so there are two kind of metrics that we looked at and relied upon, which is a capacity at 25 students for every one full-time equivalent teacher, or 27 students for every one full-time equivalent teacher. Next slide. This is what site capacity looks like based on a projected basis, and then also our current reality. And so at Andres Duarte, it has a school capacity of 810 students if we use the 27 per students for every one full-time equivalent. At Beardsley, there's a max capacity of 756. At Maxwell, there's a max capacity of 864. At Royal Oaks, there's a max capacity of 1,269. And at Valley View, there's a max capacity of 540. When you look at enrollment projections for next year, for 22-23, the enrollment projections of 356 at Andres Duarte, 423, 425, 721, and 362. And then when you look at current enrollment, those are the numbers that we shared on the current enrollment slide. I'm going to jump over and I want to talk about specifically about capacity. What capacity shows is this is the percentage of the actual campus that is being utilized by the student population. So when we look at the projection, Andres Duarte projected for next year's enrollment would be utilizing 43.9% of the campus. And if you look at the current enrollment, they are using 37.4% of the campus. At Beardsley, the projected is 55.9% of the campus. And at the current enrollment, they're using 51.1% of the campus. At Maxwell, the projected is 49.2%, and the current enrollment is 45.8%. At Royal Oaks, currently using 56.8% of the projected capacity, and the current enrollment is 62.6% of the capacity. And then at Valley View, they're currently using, the projected for next year, they would use 67% of the campus, and current capacity, they would be using 63.1% of the campus. Next slide, please.
So, Dr. Emerson,
Go
so
ahead.
in the previous slide there, it looks like there overall, I mean, there is projected growth for next year. Is that mostly due to an anticipation of more students returning to school in hopes of there being less COVID concerns, or what's sort of driving that overall growth that we're seeing on almost all the campuses?
Yeah, so that is actually, that number, the number that you see in 22, 23 projections, that's completely derived from the demographer's analysis based on everything that Dr. Pandolfo just shared, which is they look at, trends and patterns and data, but that's completely a projection based on the demographer's algorithm and their process. Do we have a reason to believe or think that we'll see an uptick? I certainly hope so, because we do have a new development that is going to be beginning to be occupied. But we are really still feeling the effects of COVID-19. We're still tracking down families, we're still tracking down students, we're still trying to find the students that were here that didn't come back and didn't show back up when we reopened our schools. But to be a fair presenter of the data, since we had those enrollment projections, I wanted to show that, I really wanted to show two things with this slide. Number one, that there is sufficient capacity at all of our campuses to be able to receive more students without an overcrowding issue. That was one thing. And then also to talk about, if we really want to talk about right-sizing the district and really getting efficient, we have to look at this issue not only in the current year, but also projected in the out years and looking at enrollment projections as well. So it just gives us a kind of a fair imbalance of what we're looking at this year and potentially what it is next year. There is an uptick, optimistic because we won't know, and there's one thing on enrollment projections versus what we call warm bodies that are actually attending school and physically present in class or on campus.
And I think, we saw that on a previous slide where we were projecting one number, but we're actually 187 students below that projected number. So
that's
that
correct.
Potentially could happen in the 22-23 year.
That is correct. That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
On average, how many kids every year do we possibly, it's been declining, so.
Correct.
Was there an average of amount of students each year that we sort of have left the district?
Vice President Carroll, I would say that I don't have the exact number committed to memory, but what I can tell you is that we budget, by design, a loss of 100. Because historically, that's what we've seen. And then we adjust the budget based on, was it 90, was it 110, but we budget for 100, because that's historically what's occurred and what's happened to us. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the other piece that was looked at in this particular component was program availability. And so what we basically laid out on for each campus is what programs and options are there at each site. And so you'll see at Andres Duarte, there's a state preschool. The grade span is TK through 8. There's an academic focus of Arts Academy, and there are 3 electives available on campus. At Beardsley, there's also a state preschool and a special education preschool program. Its grade span is also TK through 8. Can you go forward for me? One more? Thank you. There's also a TK8 grade span at Beardsley. Their academic focus is dual immersion, and there are 3 electives available on that campus as well. At Maxwell, there's also a state preschool. Its grade span is K through 8. Its academic focus is International Baccalaureate, also known as IB. There are 4 electives available on campus. And in Royal Oaks, there are no preschool programs at Royal Oaks. Its grade span is also K through 8. Its academic focus is STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And there are 8 electives that are available on campus. And at Valley View, there is no preschool option. The grade span is TK through 6. Its academic focus is technology and creative learning, and there's 1 elective available on campus. Next slide, please. Any questions?
Yeah, just before you
Go
leave
ahead,
here, how much do you think the program availability has to do with our situation as far as, how much affect the programs that we offer?
Well, I think that all of I think any family, I'm a dad and have 2 kids in middle school, we're always looking for a diverse, wide range of programming options. One thing that we did back in 2017 when we started designing the competitive advantage plan was to put a high value on the ability to design very specific thematic programs that then we offered as a value proposition to families to say, what most resonates with you? STEAM, technology, innovation, robotics, coding, dual immersion, IB, arts, what's your thing? And then we do have an open enrollment policy. And that has been something that has been really heralded by a lot of our families and a lot of our community. Does it work perfectly all the time? Absolutely not. But creating that value proposition has a lot to do with, I think, what we're starting to do, and I think what we're continuing to focus on, which is how do we retain more of our families? It's by offering a wide, diverse program and series of options. And so I think that that's really what our focus needs to be, and quite frankly, the work that I and my team have been working on quite extensively since the board gave us this charge. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the number 3 objective was to minimize impact on families and students. And so you wanted to look at mode of transportation to school and start and end time of schools. Before I go to go ahead and go to the next slide. So the primary mode of transportation to school for many of our families is walking. And so what you'll see is Andres Duarte says walking, Beardsley says walking. And this is anecdotal data. This is just reported from our principals, reported from our staff, our proctors. But what we also recognize is we say that it's walking. There's a significant number of our families that walk to Royal Oaks and walk to Valley View as well, while also combining that with transporting children by vehicle. It would be fair to say that all of our schools have a mixture of both walking and transportation by vehicle. But anecdotally, we do see a large percentage of our families that are walking at Andres Duarte, Beardsley, and Maxwell. Next slide. So start and end times. This was a big thing in 2016 because start and end times were like all over the place. And everybody had kind of their own program. We've done a lot of work since 2016 until today, really aligning the start and end times of all of our schools. And there's more that goes into it because not only do you have the elementary component of the academic bell schedule, but then you also have the middle school component as well. And so you'll see a lot more alignment and a lot more synergy in between the start and end times at all of our schools that exists now. That was not evident in 2016. but just for the sake of making sure that we're transparent and we show what this information and data shares, we provided it on a table. So you see, everybody starts in between, you know, it's basically a 40-minute span from a 20-minute span between 8:20 and 8:40. And everybody ends, again, in a pretty narrow span between 2:20 and 3:05. Next slide. The fourth variable, the fourth objective is to minimize student safety on campus. So the two variables or the two measures were the size of school campus and then also the school site incidents. If you go to the next slide. So size of school campus is just important to kind of give a sense of how big our campuses are, how much square footage that we have. And then we didn't do this analysis in this particular presentation, but when you actually look at the number of students that are actually occupying each site, and then you can do a student per square foot, you can do a student per acreage, so on and so forth. But what you can see is all of our school sites are pretty evenly sized, on the low end at 7.2 acres, and on the high end 13.1 acres. And then the building square footage, you'll see that at the two largest school sites in square footage size are Andrews Duarte and Royal Oaks, respectively. There were program, and well, I'll get to that later, actually. Let me not. That's a later slide. But that's the size of our school campuses. And again, when you juxtapose the acreage size and the square footage size, and then you also add on the capacity variable that we talked about earlier, you can see our campuses are large enough, they're spacious enough, but they're under-enrolled. And the capacity is not being maximized based on those three variables together. Next slide. Okay.
Sorry, Dr. Amos,
sorry, go
really
ahead.
quick. So on the previous slide here for the size of the campuses, so several campuses have parks associated with them. Do these sizes include that land as well? And then for the building square footage, does that include the new construction at several of the school sites?
So it is my understanding that the site acreage does include any park green athletic space, and that the building area square footage does include modernizations that were done in between 2016 and today. Yeah. All right, next slide. I'm going to spend some time on this one. Okay. So in 2016, there was an extensive conversation about school site incidents, and there was a discussion about the different types of incidents that were happening on campus. And when you looked at, and this is public information because it was a part of the RPAC's report, when you look at the scoring, and again, scoring essentially pitted schools kind of against each other, Beardsley received a pretty low score because of information that was reported about school-based incidents. And there were members of the community that expressed concern about the data and what was shared. And so we thought it'd be very prudent to go back and look at this information again. So the way that this analysis was conducted is looking at a span of from March 2020. Now, I understand that that was during COVID, and I get that, but we still have to secure our assets. We still have to take care of our properties. We still have to, and even more so when they're vacant, we have to do wellness checks and asset protection checks to make sure that there isn't graffiti or a broken sprinkler main. I believe I got a call from one of our board members about a broken sprinkler during, all those things happen, is my point. And so we wanted to make sure that we were checking and verifying on all of our campuses. So we looked at two different variables here. Outside incidents. I, as the superintendent of the school district, I receive a community report on a weekly basis. It shares with me all the things that are happening with respect to law enforcement across the city and across the district. And so what you see on the slide, it says outside incidents. We have, and I would actually say that it does say March of 2020, and I will go off of my memory prior to March of 2020, but I went back and read every one of those community reports. And I can also say that in my time here since 2018, there has not been ever any incident that involved law enforcement directly related to any of our campuses that had to do with any type of crime. Now, we do have law enforcement respond to, in some cases, a student needs assistance, there may be a medical issue, there may be an EMS call, things like that. But issues of having to report to law enforcement, have law enforcement come and actually deal with and respond to any specific issues or incidents on our campus, that has happened at none of our campuses. The argument I'm trying to make here is that all of our campuses are very, 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 very safe. And when we looked at internal incidents, what these are things that then we have to respond to as a district. Our maintenance and operations department has to have a surface ticket and they have to go out and they have to repair something or deal with something. And again, from March 2020 through today, there was one incident of one vandalized lock at Andrews Duarte. There were 2 incidents at Beardsley where we had to paint over some graffiti, and there was 1 incident at Max where we had to paint over some graffiti. There's been 0 incidents at Royal Oaks or at Valley View. Again, my argument here is our schools are exceedingly safe. They are good for our kids. They are warm, welcoming environments. And I think that this is a fair description of our school sites and of the incidents that occur with related to what we would say would be student safety. Next slide. So objective number 5 was to minimize the annual operating cost. And so this particular variable, we looked at the annual operating cost per school, per student. Next slide. So the overall annual operating cost you can see in the middle column there for each school site, ranging from an operating cost as low as $2.4 million at Valley View and to a high of $4.4 million at Royal Oaks. And then the final column is the cost per student based on annual operating costs. And that ranges from, on the low end, $6,046 per student to the high end of $7,304 per student. And this is a direct result of, again, if you look at, for instance, the difference between Maxwell and Royal Oaks, you can say, well, Royal Oaks' operating cost is much more, it's much higher. It's $1.3 million higher. But the cost per student, because of the larger student population at Royal Oaks, makes those costs equal. The cost per student to educate them based on the operating cost is equal because where you have a larger student population, you customarily have a smaller student cost per, a smaller cost per student. Next slide. So component number 6 was to maximize access to school for students and families. So the 2 variables looked at here are number of students displaced and distance needed to travel. So the number of students displaced, again, if we look at numbers that we've previously shared in this presentation, if you look at current enrollment, and then you look at projected enrollment, these would be the number of students that would be displaced if any particular campus was consolidated at the board's direction. And so when we look at this variable, one of the things that the RPAC thought, and we continue to think, is how do you displace the smallest amount of students as possible while keeping into account maximizing programs, services, and all the other variables that we've already discussed, right? If we looked at any one specific variable only, you can make an argument for any school. But when you take a totality of all of the data and all of the information, you may draw a different conclusion, is my point. Next slide. So the distance needed to travel, that's an unknown. I don't know what that would be because I would have to be able to pinpoint where every single person in the district lives. But what I would say is if you look at where our school sites are located, it will give you a sense of potentially how that impact might be. So Andrews Duarte is located in the central east portion of the district. Beardsley is located in the central south portion of the district. Maxwell is in I would call the extreme southwest corner of the district. Royal Oaks is in the central north portion of the district. And I would characterize that Valley View is in the extreme northeast corner of the district. And so when we, go back one, thanks Marcelo. When we look at this, Our thinking is, we've always really talked about from the onset of this conversation, how do we focus on potential options that are centrally located, because that tends to be the easiest way to reposition and reallocate students, while also minimizing impact on families and trying to minimize the distance that they would have to travel. Next slide. Minimizing impact on staff. This is the number 7 objective. And there are 2 variables, which are the number of staff displaced and the number of at-risk positions. Next slide. So when we look at the potential of consolidation, we recognize that there are students and staff that will be involved in that transition. And one of the key pieces that is kind of at play that we always know with respect to students is that where the students go, generally, teachers will follow. But we also have multiple classifications of employees. So we have our certificated employees as well as our classified employees. And it is not exactly the same for classified employees, because classified employees, there will be some redundancy. There are certain positions that you won't need multiple positions at a potential school site. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you look at the actual allocation, and there are two things I want to explain on this slide, because you'll see on the first line, classified FTEs. So those are full-time equivalent employees. There are 27.75. That covers a total of 40 total employees. There are some employees that are fractionalized, or they have a percentage of an FTE. At Beardsley, there are 17.58 classified employees. At Maxwell, 12.86, Royal Oaks, 21.56, Valley View, 18.43. And then when you look at certificated staff, at each of those school sites, there's 21.8 full-time equivalents at Andrews Duarte, 26.4 at Beardsley, 23.3 at Maxwell, 36.2 at Royal Oaks, and 18.6 at Valley View. Next slide. So let me expand a little bit, and that is very small, so I will read it out loud.
Dr. Amerson?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, if I could ask
No
a
problem.
couple of questions on the previous slide.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of our elementary schools or K-8 schools have roughly ballpark similar numbers of students, but it seems like the number of FTEs are quite a bit greater in some than others. What accounts for those differences?
We will ask Mr. Crosby to address that.
Thank you. Sorry. It really reflects into special ed classes and special ed aides being part of that, where some sites, the programs are different at each site. And so like your classified FTE is a full-time equivalent, but amount of people that it equals to, some people work 3 hours instead of 6 hours, so that we make more people per that FTE position as well. But when we have special ed classes with special ed students, sometimes that's one-on-one aid with that student, or classroom aides with that student as well. So that makes where there's more employees based on where those special education classes are housed.
Thank you very much.
All right, next slide. So the other variable that was looked at under this particular objective is the number of at-risk positions. And so through a consolidation process, there will be an identification of excess positions, as I was referring to, and sometimes in the classified area, as well as in the management area, as well as in the certificated area, and I'm going to talk about what those are. To maximize efficiency, a number of positions will need to be evaluated through this process, and these include but are not limited to the following: school principal, office manager, head custodian, digital media specialist, teaching and learning coach, cafeteria manager, and other positions identified as necessary to maximize efficiency. So this is not a comprehensive list, but rather a representative list of potential positions that we would need to analyze and evaluate, because, just to make it really, really simplistic, if we consolidate from having 5 campuses to having 4 campuses, we don't need 2 principals at one school. And we don't need 2 cafeteria managers at one school. And so that's where you get, where we will need to do some evaluation of positions and determine how we address those things. Because that is also part of the built-in potential savings that we would realize by eliminating excess positions. Next slide. So the next one is to maximize the use of existing facilities. This is number 8. And so to maximize and use the excess school capacity, we look at some examples. So if the board approves a recommendation to consolidate into 4 schools, there will be a significant excess of K-6 or K-8 capacity that would be remaining. So different things that we could do to maximize the use of our existing facilities would be to expand class size reduction, to use surplus classrooms for other district uses, to provide a universal preschool program at each campus, to remove leased and or owned portables, initiate joint use agreements with our ROP or community college. Those are different things that we could do. These are just examples, but we wanted to provide some context to the board of potential opportunities and our options we could explore if we were to move forward with this process. Next slide. So the 9th objective is to minimize necessary capital improvements. And so in this particular area, the projected cost to reconfigure schools to K-8, that was something that we had to consider, and that was considered back in 2016-17, and we spent significant capital and significant revenue on reconfiguring the schools to K-8s. Significant capital improvements have already been made across the district when you look at the things that were done to expand to K-8s at multiple schools across the district. And then we'll continue to work with the board and consider, when appropriate, any additional capital improvements to enhance and increase the instructional program and the educational program that we're trying to provide to students. Next slide, please. So variable or objective number 10 is to maximize the benefit to the community. So what this one is really about is what could potentially happen with a campus if the board so chooses to close it. Because we have not made a formal recommendation, and because we haven't gotten direct action or direction from the board, we believe that this is a variable that is best analyzed after a board decision or direction is given. And so I didn't want to be presumptuous and start sharing what you do with a campus, because we have to identify what that campus is first. Next slide. Similarly, to minimize traffic impact, staff will also analyze this component based on board's decision and direction. We had commissioned a traffic study back in 2016. We would be more than prepared to do that as well as we move forward, and would be looking for the board decision or direction on looking at any kind of traffic study or traffic analysis. Next slide. So the 12th objective was to minimize wasted bond allocations. And the variable that was looked at was the number of bond dollars spent. So what's prepared on the next slide, go ahead, is the amount of bond dollars that were spent in Measure B, as well as the bond dollars that were spent in Measure E. And so what you will see is the total bond expenditures that happened across the district. On the lowest end was Valley View at $1.1 million. And on the higher end, the most money expended on any specific campus is at Maxwell. $10.7 million was spent at Maxwell. And then the other dollar amounts, $1.6 million at Andrews Duarte, $5.4 million at Beardsley, and $10.4 million at Royal Oaks. The bulk majority of those dollars were spent on K-8 expansion and on making sure there was adequate classroom capacity to be able to accommodate a population growth at a particular school site. So one burning question that always comes up is, well, you spend a lot of money on expanding and putting Gen 7 classrooms in buildings at other sites, but you didn't put them at Valley View or at Andrews Duarte. Well, let's talk about that just a little bit. At Andrews Duarte, as you've already seen on previous slides, Andrews Duarte has a standard capacity already now. It is the second largest campus by acreage. It's the second largest campus by overall square footage. And that is one of the main reasons why there weren't additional campus classrooms that were expanded on the campus, because there was already significant space that was available. That was one piece. So that's why you didn't see that happen at Andrews Duarte. At Valley View, there were weather issues. There were literally, well, actually, I think it started with a fire. There were the major fires that happened, I believe, in 2015 or 2016? 2016. There were the fires that happened in 2016, and then the subsequent mudslides and floods that happened after that. That then created an inability for us to do a K-8 expansion at Valley View. And again, you look at Valley View's max capacity at 540. There was an interest by this board and by this community to expand Valley View to a K-8, but as a result of those weather issues. And then there was a 5-year hiatus that was instituted by the city of Duarte, and you guys all may remember the K-rails that were there for many years. And so for those reasons, there were not expansions of classroom space allocation at Andrews Duarte or at Valley View. Next slide. Objective number 13, this is also work that will be completed after board decision and direction, which is, again, this is again, maximizing disposition value. It's what to do with a property if a property is consolidated or closed. Okay. All right, so minimize neighborhood impact conflict. This is the final objective. This was the 14th objective, and as I kind of finish just the objectives, I'd remind the board and the community that these were ranked in order of importance by the RPAC. The first one being most important and the 14th being the least important in their opinion. But what was looked at in this particular area was to maximize preservation of park, athletic, and green space. And so if we go to the next slide, this is where we actually have parks that are attached, and this goes to the question about overall acreage and capacity, and did it include park space as well? So at Andrews Duarte, there's Otis Gordon Sports Park. At Beardsley, there's Beardsley Park. At Maxwell, there is no direct park attached to it. There's a very large athletic field, a very large series of athletic fields there, but no defined park. At Royal Oaks, also very large green space and athletic fields, but no assigned and attached park. And then at Valley View, there is Glenn Miller Park. I just learned the name. I knew there was a park there. I just didn't know the name until recently. But there's Glenn Miller Park.
Dr. Emerson?
Yes, sir.
Could you briefly just talk a little bit about the relationship with the city that exists with these parks? My understanding is they're on school district property, but maintained by the city. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we, where you see on the screen here, those 3 parks all are situated on district property. But we do have a long-standing, very, very productive joint use agreement with the city that helps to maintain those. And we talk about, I think we actually just I don't know if renegotiate is the right term, because we're not really renegotiating, but we renewed those joint use agreements, I think, over the last couple of years to make sure they were current. But it is a joint collaborative partnership that we have with the city that allows us to have those parks on our campuses while they also maintain. And we know that's really, really important to make sure that we have youth sports areas, adult sports areas, a place where people can stay healthy and fit. We are the city of health, so we know that parks are very, very important. And so we recognize and understand that that's going to be an important component for us to think about with respect to this process. Next slide.
Dr. Emerson?
Yes.
With the only exception that even there is no park, really a park on Maxwell School in Royal Oaks, those are not included on the city of Duarte contract or to maintain, right?
Well,
because Royal Oaks is in Bradbury and Maxwell is in the county area.
Yeah, that is fair, and maybe that's a question. Maybe that's why there's no park domiciled there, directly connected. So yes, what you see, Andrews Duarte, Beardsley, and Valley View, those 3 schools are directly situated in the city of Duarte. Maxwell is situated in the county area, and Royal Oaks is domiciled in the city of Bradbury. That's
Right.
correct.
Right.
Yes. Okay, next slide. Additional considerations. So I think in an effort to provide as much information and as much context and as much of a discussion as possible for the board, we wanted to share some additional information that we think will be helpful in the deliberative process. One of the big metrics that we have discussed in the past is school site safety. And so we thought it would be prudent to use one of our kind of really important informational tools, and that's the Healthy Kids Survey. And so if we can go to the next slide, and I'll kind of share what these numbers are, and I'll kind of share what this is sharing with you all. This is the Healthy Kids Survey over the course of 2 years. The most recent data that we have available, if I remember correctly, is that right, Dr. Hillman? We don't have Healthy Kids Survey data yet for last year. We don't have it. We just had it right now. Yes. Yeah. Got it. So our kids just took it, so we don't have the most recent data, but this is the most recent available. And there was no Healthy Kids Survey during COVID. Yeah. Right. So this is the most current data that we have available. And so what you'll see is under grades 5 and 7, we look at things like school connectedness. How connected do you feel to your school? Do you feel that you have a place? Do you feel that you're valued? So school connectedness. And so if you look at this 2-year data set, 2017-18 and 2018-19, you see grade 5 school connectedness, and you see grade 7 school connectedness. And then you see grade 5, school perceived as very safe or safe. So asking our 5th grade students, do they have the perception that it's very safe when they're at school? And then also grade 7 students, do they feel that it's very, very safe while they're at school? And again, when you look at these numbers, it's fairly balanced and fairly even across our school district. And again, I want to reinforce this data because sometimes there will be people who have perceptions and will make assertions about some schools are more safe than others. And what we believe is that all of our schools are safe, and all of our schools value creating a space that's engaging and caring and nurturing for our students. And this data, we always look at it as a tool for growth and a tool for opportunity for discussion with our staff, with our principals, and with our students around these things, around school connectedness and perceived safety while you're on campus. But I just wanted to share this as well to augment the information that I shared on school site incidents from earlier, because I think it's also an important piece. It's something that we track very closely and we look at. Next slide, please. So then intra-district transfer data. This is current data. And so one of the questions that I believe that Board Member Bell asked earlier, and that was around, where people, the value of programs and where families select and where families choose. And again, we value the opportunity for families to choose and select a program that most aligns with their students' passion or their child's, dreams or goals or whatever the case it may be. And having an open enrollment system facilitates that, and it creates a great opportunity. And so when we look at intra-district transfer data, so transfers in, so at Andrews Doherty we had transfers in 59, and this current year we had 118 transfers out. At Beardsley we had 103 transfers in to Beardsley and 74 transfers out. At Maxwell we had 34 transfers in and 119 transfers out. At Royal Oaks we had 164 transfers in and 83 transfers out. And at Valley View we had 97 transfers in and 52 transfers out. When you total up all these numbers, you get a net difference of a net minus 59 students at Andrews Doherty, plus 29 students at Beardsley, negative 85 students at Maxwell, positive 81 students at Royal Oaks, and positive 45 students at Valley View. Next slide. Question, sorry.
Yes, Dr. Emerson. So just so I understand this correctly, so if we look at just the first line, so for Andrews Doherty, there were 59 students that resided elsewhere in Doherty Unified that
Yes.
elected to transfer into Andrews Duarte, and then 118 that transferred out but stayed within our district.
That is correct. This is all intra-district
Okay.
transfer data.
Okay.
Yes.
And do we have inter-district numbers?
Not this evening, we do not.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions?
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide. So one additional piece of information that we thought was really, really important for the board to consider is site-specific programs. And so programs identified in our LCAP, Supplemental and Concentration Funding, that we have put in place, we have instituted to increase and improve the services for our unduplicated pupils. So so the AVID program. The AVID program provides college readiness, it provides a college-going culture, it provides structures that enhance study skills and critical thinking. That program is currently in our LCAP and can be situated at Andrews Duarte and Royal Oaks, excuse me. Read 180. This is specifically a literacy-based enhancement when you want to support students in increasing their literacy skills. That is provided through our LCAP, and it is situated at Andrews Duarte, at Maxwell, Royal Oaks, and Valley View. Our International Baccalaureate is specifically written into our LCAP. We have made significant investments in that, not only historically, but also recently with we have been a PYP authorized IB school for several years and going through the process of also certifying as a MYP authorized school, which is an extensive amount of work that is done over multiple years by the principal and staff and Maxwell community. And then finally, also written into the LCAP very, very directly is dual immersion at Beardsley. And also, there have been significant investments and specific programmatic things that happen at Beardsley to facilitate a dual immersion program. To teach in dual immersion, you have to have a very, very specialized California credential, or very special authorization within California's credentialing system, which is called a B-CLAD, which essentially means that you are bilingual and able to teach in multiple languages. So that's the B-CLAD authorization. That also augments the teacher's underlying credential, multiple subject credential, with a B-CLAD credential, with a B-CLAD authorization. So it's important to note that because we want to remember that AVID, Read 180, International Baccalaureate, and dual immersion are all things that we have invested in, has been a part of the LCAP process, and the LCAP process always includes staff input, community input, parent input, and so I just wanted to make sure that we called out specifically where these things are, because I think they're important considerations for the board to deliberate around.
Dr. Emerson,
Yes, sir.
could you comment a little bit on how, I guess for lack of a better term, mobile these programs are? I mean, how if one of the schools were to be consolidated, how easy is it to pick up that program and move it elsewhere?
So I'll go one by one. AVID is less of a program and more of an elective offering and a framework by how you can teach content and create educational experiences for students. I'm a former AVID teacher, so I can talk about AVID for a long time, but I'll be brief. It really is. It can port easily to other places because there are trainings, there are methodologies, there are structures and strategies. There is not a different credential that you need. There is not a different authorization that you need. There are professional development opportunities that you can create for your staff to have people trained and then be able to use AVID strategies, technologies. And if you have enough student interest, you can create the AVID elective program, which is kind of the heart of the program, is having that elective where kids can come to that program every single day, study skills, Wicker strategies, writing, inquiry, collaboration, and reading, and really focusing in a structured way around those things. That's actually WICOR because there's organizing in there as well. But that's pretty portable. Read 180 also fairly portable. It is portable because it is less student option and more student referral because there is a literacy need that we need to address. It is driven by software and by licensing agreements that we have to have with the provider, the professional development that goes along with it. And we have many, the vast majority of our teachers that would be at our schools that are being considered would be authorized to teach a Read 180 course. So credentialing wouldn't be a challenge necessarily. We could certainly find teachers to staff it. And it's portable because it's software and professional development that goes along with it. International Baccalaureate, a little bit less portable because it is intense training over multiple years to get to a point where your NYP authorized program, NYP authorized school, you are then designated in the International Baccalaureate database, that is a worldwide database, as being an NYP or PYP authorized school. We would have to really, we'd have to have some collaborative conversations with the International Baccalaureate organization if Maxwell were to be considered for consolidation, because there could be programmatic impact to that. So it's less portable. There are not specific credentialing requirements for it, but there is definitely a distinct connection with wanting to teach in that framework and wanting to do the collaborative, thoughtful, deep planning, instructional design that goes into International Baccalaureate, which I think that our staff and our leadership at Maxwell has spent a lot of time building culture and building kind of the concepts that are really, really important for that program to thrive. So a little bit less portable. Dual immersion, a little bit less portable because for the aforementioned things that I shared. The BCLAD credential, and then also because of the investments that have been made over the last several years in dual immersion, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Hillman, where are we at now? Are we up to 4th grade? We're up to 5th grade at this point. So we now have a cohort of students that have been in dual immersion from kinder, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, up to 5th grade. And we have cohorts in every one of those grades at this point. If we wanted to keep the dual immersion program intact, we would have to find a way to port all of them together to somewhere else. So it's again, it's a little bit less portable. And then also, you also would have to port all of those same teachers that are already BCLAD authorized to also teach in that program.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide. So, reasons to recommend school consolidation. It's a summation. Declining enrollment lessens the need for the number of campuses. Smaller schools become less financially efficient to operate, and they take resources away from other areas across the district. Educational programs may be enhanced with larger enrollments. Declining enrollment reduces district revenues and adds stress to the district's budget that is already underfunded. Facilities resources such as bond proceeds can be effectively utilized if expended on fewer campuses. And there may be a community benefit to repurposing and possibly selling a school site. There could be. So we're just saying these are possible reasons to recommend a school consolidation. Let me unpack a couple of these. Some of the thought exchange data, which I think is very, very on point, it gets feedback around how do we create the most efficient middle school experience for students. And so, you know, there are questions, and you heard at the earlier portions of this presentation where we could look at options to essentially try to figure out ways to provide more of a well-rounded middle school experience by focusing our resources within the district, right? If you go back to the table that showed the number of electives at each course, at each school site, if we streamline that and consolidate that, likely we can increase the number of electives that are available at the middle school grades, right? The other things, educational programs may be enhanced with larger enrollments. One of the other benefits that we think would be a byproduct of this, this process, would be decreasing the impact of combination classrooms. Less combination classrooms are great for us educationally. I don't know a lot, I can't say I don't know any. I only know one family that really liked combination classrooms. They're at Beardsley, they loved it. They said combination classes are great. Vast majority of folks are not of that same opinion. Ideally, we know that the best scenario is to have pure first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade classes. And so with larger enrollments, you're able to smooth out and create larger groups of second graders, third graders, fourth graders, and likely be able to reduce the number of combination classrooms that exist across the district. Let's go to the next slide. So next steps, so I alluded to this earlier. Based on the totality of information presented and discussed throughout this process, is the intention of the DUSD executive team to move forward with a recommendation of school consolidation for either Andrews Duarte Arts Academy or Beardsley Dual Language Academy at the December 16th, 2021 board meeting. Next slide. Thank you, and Madam President, I'll turn it back over to you for additional questions.
Okay, board members, is the time to ask anything that you would like to ask at this point.
Anything, huh?
Anything, please. Just for information to the public, I just want to make sure to explain to you that we have asked Dr. Emerson to explain to everyone what really is going on. They are boards across the California. There are consolidating schools, that is the same thing as closing schools, and the board take about from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 1 to 4 o'clock in the morning to talk about the reasons why they are closing schools. And just last week, we were at CSBA conference, and we hear from Napa Valley. They closed 4 schools in 1 year, and they are looking into close 2 more. It is a large school district, but everyone is facing that decline in enrollment. I think that Dr. Emerson has been very transparent in telling the public, the ones that are here in person and the ones that are following us on Streamline. And I appreciate that our community can say, yes, we hear. I hope that for the ones who speak just Spanish, your translator have told you what's going on exactly. And we are open after the board meeting if you have questions for us. I don't have no problem to address the questions. Otherwise, I can just tell you that we were in the same situation 5 years ago. If by that date, 5 years ago, we should continue with the process of closing a school, and we will not be in the hole that we are right now. And it's not easy for a board member. I think when you elect a board member, you are electing a board member to represent every single student in the district, not just one school, not because I live in a certain area, I just represent the school that is in that area. We are here to represent every single student, every single school, and it's not easy. Probably in my 24 years of service, facing a closing school is one of the toughest decisions, and it's not a legacy that we like to live. Unfortunately, it is time. I have seen small signs around the city, not everywhere, but it says save schools, save our parks. And believe me, if we don't close one school, we will not be able to save the schools. It is hard, it is tough. And so if you, like I say, it is very important that the person who is translating the meeting tell the community what really we have said, and if you need copies of our presentation, it is available, Mercedes? Dr. Emerson?
So we do have as I alluded to earlier in the presentation about the thought exchange comprehensive reports, they will be on the district's website tomorrow. There's a dedicated page on the district's website that says school consolidation, where all of our previous presentations and the thought exchange reports will all be housed with information and accessible for our community.
Thank you, Dr. Emerson. Any other comment or question?
I do.
Cece, go ahead.
We were all at that session, so we heard what was going on in Napa Valley, which they brought the reserve. They were similar to our district. They had a 3% reserved, and by closing schools, they made it go up to about 17% within that time after. But what I was going to ask is the whole idea, if we don't do anything, there's talks about state coming in and taking over. What are the repercussions of that? I mean, I know they explained a little bit about that, but what really goes on when they go in and decide to, okay, there's not enough money in here, the reserves are really low. What happens then?
So one of my most important jobs is to protect the integrity and protect the influence and the impact of the school board. And so one of the ways that we do that is by remaining fiscally solvent. And when we can remain fiscally solvent, that keeps the board in a decision-making position. If we don't take steps to maintain fiscal solvency, then in the most extreme case, the state can assign a district a trustee that oversees the district. And in my, not experience, but in my watching this happen, the board still sits up here, superintendent still sits up here, but a trustee runs everything, makes all the decisions. The board has no say. The board doesn't decide. And I think the most important thing that we want to do is if we can control what happens in our community and if we can control what happens in our district, we should do everything that we can to make sure that we control that, because then we create that future for our kids and for our schools. And so I think that's the most important thing. Doing nothing is actually the steps that we took in 2016. And again, based on my comments from earlier, doing nothing at this point, things have gotten worse since 2016, and there are several other variables and factors that are at play now with respect to, ongoing issues with declining enrollment, but most notably responding to COVID-19. We're going to work really hard to find all of our students, but one of the things that we know, and we've seen some softening of our numbers that I talked about and Dr. Pandolfo mentioned as well in his comments earlier, but this is also something that's going on across the county. I think it was Dr. Finley that mentioned that. This is something that's going on across the state. So the long-term impact of declining enrollment is going to be honest. I think he said in the neighborhood of 20%. I was on a webinar about a month or so ago with LACO, and they had quoted that there are 40,000 students across LA County that are missing after COVID. And I shared this at some point. I think I shared it with the community last night, and I'll say it again here, which is one of the things that we did as a board, absolutely the right thing, the bold action that we took in response to COVID. We issued all of our scholars Chromebooks. We gave them new laptops, we gave them Chromebooks, we gave them hotspots. We made sure that when we sent them home because of this global pandemic that was starting to take over, we sent them home with the tools to be able to stay connected to us. But there was an assumption that we made. And the assumption that we made was that every day that a student logged on and showed up, we saw them on the computer, we assumed that they were logging on from Huntington Drive or from Buena Vista Drive. That wasn't necessarily the case. And we're learning that was not the case. They could have moved, upped and moved, and we would have never known the difference because they still logged in and still showed up to school virtually every day. We'd have no reason to think otherwise. But then when we started and reopened school this year, we saw these softening numbers. And so for all of those reasons and for all of the things that we're thinking about, our number one goal is to react and respond, because doing nothing, in my opinion, is not an option at this point. And I feel very strongly that we're in a position to make this recommendation to the board, and hopeful that the board would support it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, Dr. Amerson, I know that our community recently supported a bond, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how that large sum of money does or does not impact our ability to continue kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
Yeah, so one of the first things that folks may say is, well, you don't need to do anything. I mean, you've got all that bond money. Well, the bond money is specifically for the modernization and the new construction of district facilities and district buildings. It cannot go to salaries. It cannot go to operating costs. It cannot go to benefits. It cannot go to just normally operating the school district on a day-to-day basis. So those monies are there, but they're specifically to do some things that actually are very, very elegantly written in the thought exchange feedback around middle school expansion, expansion of opportunities, middle school expansion of facilities. Those are things that we can do with bond dollars, and then also that likely could be a byproduct of how we then increase and enhance in student enrollment, is by having great, top-notch, wonderful facilities across the district. And so we have those dollars, but they cannot be used they cannot be used as a substitute for doing this process.
I just had a comment, if you don't mind. Dr. Amerson, I've been a longtime board member. Naturally, I was in some of the other surveys when we dealt with declining enrollment and other situations financially. I just want to tell you right off the top, you own this proposal. You own this, and I've listened to you in depth, because I know that this is something that one of those real aha moments for us as board members and really staff. This is going to really define who we're going to be in the next few years coming. And so I just appreciate the way that you have put this program together, the way you have at least given a proposal where we understand what we're dealing with. You can talk about it, we can kind of ha-ha and all that kind of stuff, but this is serious stuff. This is talking about our babies, our young people, the future for our community here. And I just want to thank you for the way you have put this together. And as a board, at least we have the information to make a decision that will be the right size of our school district. And again, we had some things in 2016 that we had to make a decision back then, and we kind of kicked the can down the road because no one ever thought it would get to be just like this. And again, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you and your staff, your administrative staff, who looks at all of the things that you tell them. And I could tell by the way that you went through this whole presentation, you own this. And again, I appreciate the leadership that you've given us. And again, for us to make a decision, at least you've given us a path of understanding. We could stand around and talk about it and fight about different things, but at least we have the information now based on this particular presentation that you've given us and the information that your staff has provided for us to be able to make this tough decision. But again, it's going to be tough either way we do it, but I just appreciate the way that you've taken the time to at least give our community a chance to survive in this. So thank you very much for all of this information. And I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
one more
Dr.
thing.
Fallon. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Emerson, so the timeline that has been put forth here, is upon us very soon. With this recommendation that will be forthcoming, I guess I'm just curious as to how that will be received by us, how it will be received by the community. What sort of additional input will we as a board be able to provide, questions asked? How can the community be involved, provide input once? Because from what I've seen tonight, you've kind of given us the raw data to look at, but then there's the actual analysis of said data to make that recommendation. So how is that all going to happen, and how can we as a board be involved and the community be involved with that?
So I think the most important thing is to share that, again, this is a multifaceted, multi-stage process. There's some legal steps that have to be taken as like a first initial step, which I think we could have Serene come forward and talk about kind of next steps. Not quite yet, because I'm going to talk a little bit. I don't want you to just stand there. What I want to be really clear about is that if the board accepts our recommendation, it starts a series of additional conversations and additional levels of engagement, because as we move forward, we're going to have to intimately involve our parents and our community members, our city, our partners, as we go through a transition process. Between now and the 16th, I'm available 24/7 to have any conversations with individual board members, clarify, provide additional details, provide additional information. As far as involving the community, we certainly will remain open to that. We would anticipate doing additional community input sessions as we move forward to make sure that things are kept front and center for us. We believe that the thought exchange data and that those comprehensive reports are, quite frankly, a roadmap for us, a series of checklists to make sure that we keep those things front and center, and those are part of the planning and the part of the decision making. But my initial thought is I'm hopeful that I presented raw data that hopefully is fairly simplistic to analyze, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to make it plain and vanilla to say, here are the numbers, and in some cases I think they speak for themselves, because I'll take us back to the original concept, which was there were essentially two viable options, and that's why, after even looking at the raw data and just looking at a totality of those numbers, a totality of that information, all those metrics, I still think that those two are viable options, and we have to determine between now and when we post our board agenda which to recommend. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm trying to.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'll try you at all hours. Yeah, that's just some questions.
By all means, please.
Thank you.
And then just from a legal standpoint, kind of next steps, Serene, do you want to come forward and talk about the next piece?
Good evening. Hopefully you can all hear me. Dr. Amerson covered it really well, but in terms of the very next step is that we would work with district staff to pull together the rationale and the support for the recommendation that's being brought to the board, which will occur at the next board meeting. So what you would be approving is a resolution to consolidate and / close a school, and you would approve a project under CEQA that's part and parcel of that. And then, of course, there would be a supporting agenda item or staff report that delves into all of the details and backup for why that recommendation is being brought to the board.
Thank you, Serene.
Okay.
I think we're good. All right.
Dr. Emerson, if Marcelo can go back, I think were the reasons why we are about to make a decision next week.
Probably one more, Marcelo.
Okay. If it's specifically for the people that has been translating this meeting and for everyone, I would like you to please read this again. I just want to make sure that the community understand the reasons. And I know it has been a large presentation, a long presentation, very informative, but I want community to keep that in their heads.
Absolutely.
In their hearts.
My pleasure, Madam President. So reasons to recommend school consolidation. Declining enrollment lessens the need for the number of campuses. Smaller schools become less financially efficient to operate and take resources away from other areas. Educational programs may be enhanced with larger enrollments. Declining enrollment reduces district revenues and adds stress to the district budget that is already underfunded. Facility resources such as bond proceeds can be more effectively utilized if expended on fewer campuses. And there may be a community benefit to repurposing and possibly selling a school site.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions regarding this, can we continue with our board meeting? Okay, I believe we're gonna move to item 8.2, presentation for the 4 proposed trusted area map.
Yes, give me one moment, Madam President. I just need to pull a document. All right, thank you, Madam President. So after the November board meeting where proposed trustee area maps were presented, the district received some community feedback suggesting we consider a map where Huntington Drive is crossed to the north, if necessary for population rebalancing on the west side of the district's boundaries instead of on the east side. So, and that you'll see in the maps in the back, you'll see that the red trustee area, it crosses Huntington Drive more towards the east portion of the school district. And we received some community feedback that said maybe you can, instead of having any kind of crossing of Huntington Drive in the red on the east, was there a way to have that drift across Huntington Drive to the west? So our demographer prepared a map, which we will be calling Scenario 4. And Scenario 4 includes 3 Latino majority citizens voting age population majority areas. The demographer will be presenting more detailed information on Scenario 4. And after tonight's presentation, Scenario 4 will be included on the district's website for review and comment by the community. And Scenario 4 will also be agendized for feedback at the next public hearing, which will take place on December 16th. Mercedes, just checking with you. The public hearing for Scenario 4 will be on December 16th. And because Scenario 4 was not available until tonight, we did not include it on the agenda as a scenario for tonight's public hearing, but the public is welcome to comment on it during tonight's public hearing. The board will be selecting a scenario and approving the transition to by-trustee area elections at its January meeting, which will take place on January 16th? January 16th, thank you. So please welcome Angela Banuelos from Cooperative Strategies, who is here to present information about the new scenario number 4. Angela.
Hello, good evening, members of the board, Dr. Emerson, executive cabinet members. My name is Angela Banuelos. I'm the demographer assisting with your transition to voting areas. So if we can please go to the next slide. It's just going to be a recap of the data that we've provided, and Mr. Robbins, Todd Robbins, your legal counsel, has gone over. But this is an overview of the 2020 census data, and here is what we provide an overview of the total population. We use the total population to help us identify how many inhabitants should be divided in through each area. Excuse me. And here we can see that there's 28,094 inhabitants within the school district boundaries. So the total population is provided by the Census Bureau, which is held at the California Department of Finance and Demographic Unit at Berkeley. And if we go to the next slide, we'll go over the citizen voting age population. So the citizen voting age population gives us a better estimate to identify who's eligible to vote, so citizens who actually are voters in the community, and identify protected communities, protected class voters, and identifying those communities and not impair them from electing a candidate of their choice. So here we see that the largest protected class voters is the Hispanic Latino population at 47.6%. Next slide, please. So I believe Mr. Robbins has already gone over slide 1, 2, and 3, considerations 1, 2, and 3, I'm sorry. So we can just skip over to the next slide, please. So scenario 1 has a variance of 6.8%. There are 2 majority protected class voters within area 4 and 5 for the Hispanic Latino community. Next slide, please. Scenario 2. Again, it's a slight variation of scenario 1. We try to use the Huntington Drive as a natural boundary, but of course we need to balance the population, so that's why we have to extend it over that north side. Next slide, please. Scenario 2 has a variance of 5.4%. Again, this one has a majority protected class area in Trustee Area 4 and 5 for the Hispanic Latino community. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This again is another variation of Scenario 1 and 2, where we try to, again, keep Huntington Drive as a natural dividing boundary, but because of the population balance, we went a little over Huntington Drive on the north side. Next slide, please. This particular scenario has a variance of 5.9%. And again, we see a protected, majority protected class voting in Trustee Area 4 and 5 for the Hispanic Latino community. And to present tonight is, next slide, please, Scenario 4, where we adjusted, where we did the transition of Huntington Drive, and as Dr. Emerson alluded to, we moved the boundary to the east side, west side of the boundaries on Huntington Drive, so it doesn't cut over around Royal Oaks Academy. So this was submitted, this consideration was submitted by a community member or community members as part of suggestions. So this was what we were able to do in terms of population balances without making it look too uncompact or uncontiguous in a fashion. So if we move to the next slide. This particular scenario has a variance of 7.5%, and something more notable within this scenario is that Trustee Area 3, 4, and 5 have a majority protected class for the Hispanic Latino community in, again, Trustee Area number 3, 4, and 5, with the CVAP, which is the citizen voting age population, people who are eligible to vote, citizens, is above 50%. So that's how you identify whether or not that is a protected class majority area. And next slide, please. And I'm here to answer any questions regarding Scenario 4 or any of these scenarios that you may have.
Board members?
So, yes, can I just ask a quick question? So, in terms of having this third district have a protected class with a majority, that is required by law that we follow that. Is that correct?
That would be best for your district council to answer. I just know that if it's created, we have to present it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There is no other question? Okay. Before we move to public hearing, I would like to ask Dr. Emerson if you can please tell us why we are here tonight talking about this. And
Yeah.
what is the idea of what's going on?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam President. So back in 2019, the district received a letter from a law firm, and the law firm asserted that the district was violating the California Voting Rights Act, and there was a demand that we move from having our board members be elected at large, meaning elected by the entire district boundaries, but rather have them elected by trustee areas. So we went through a deliberative process, and what we really wanted to make sure that we did was that we were good stewards of the district's resources, and so we worked to try to find a reasonable resolution to the demand that we received. And then we also wanted to make sure that we waited until the 2020 census data came out, because we could have gone through this process in 2019, 2020, and it would have been, that process could have been done, and we would have expended the funds to do that. And then we would have to turn around and do it again because of the census data that came out this year. And so rather than doing it twice, we just worked through a process to be able to do it one time, which is what we're doing now. And so, again, under the California Voting Rights Act, as well as under the Federal Voting Rights Act, moving from being in at-large elections by trustee area elections is something that under the law we're mandated to do at this point. And so we're working through that process. There has been, these maps were designed and developed and shown to the public, and then also shown at a community forum last week, I think it was, 2 weeks ago maybe. And so we're back again to now have a public hearing, hear from any community members, while also introducing this fourth scenario. And so that's kind of where we are and how we got here.
Thank you, Dr. Emerson. There is any other questions for her right now? No?
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now continue with public hearing, and did I have a motion to open to the public hearing for item number 9?
Move to open?
Moved by Mr. Bell, second. Second by Mrs. Carroll. Okay, at this, I will call roll call to open this. Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Carroll?
Yes.
Dr. Finley?
Yes.
Mrs. Diaz, yes, and Mrs. Ku is absent. Well, right now is this is a motion and has been seconded to open the public hearing for this item. And if there's anyone in the public who would like to approach the microphone, this is the time to ask questions regarding the maps and the districts. Seeing none. Oh, it's coming. Thank you. Will you please tell us your name?
Good evening, Board. My name is Juan Carlos Lopez Driotis. I have a question regarding map number 4. There was a term used during the presentation that kept on coming in my ear, something about variability or something regarding standard of deviation. On map number 4, you referred to it as 7.4, a number of that magnitude. Every time a new map came up, the number kept on increasing. What is that about?
So, Board, with your permission, I can respond. The law mandates that the variance be under 10%. So anything that is under 10% is okay. It's permitted.
Variance pertaining
Variance
to what?
between each trustee area as it's designed.
For the protected classes?
Just overall.
Overall?
Correct.
In terms of population?
Correct.
Understood.
And I'm looking at Angela to make sure I'm saying that correctly.
Can I answer?
Yeah, well, please, you can do it better than me. That works.
I wasn't sure because we're in public comment, public hearing. So the variance is the difference of the largest populated area and the least populated area divided by the ideal trustee area size. So basically, when we go back to the total population, you divide that by the amount of trustees in the district. So in this case, there's 5. So whatever that number is the ideal trustee number, and then that would give you the variance. So as long as it's below 10%, then it's admissible and allowable.
And so by definition, are we saying then that there are trustees that have 7.4 more, represent 7.4 more people compared to the one that's the least?
So if we look at the data, the demographics on each scenario,
Yes.
under each trustee area, there would be a variance percentage. So that would tell you how much above that 0% or that ideal number are they above or under. So because they know that we cannot equally split everything, they give us that variance to play with because some census blocks have more inhabitants than others. So some trustees might have, that ideal number, some might have less, some might have more. So that's why that variance plays into tonight's conversation.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Any other comment? Would you please tell us your name?
My name's Tamara Godo. I teach at AD. I was wondering, you went over programs. In the presentation, you didn't mention anything about special education. I was just wondering if you guys are going to take that into account when you make your decision.
Thank you, Mrs. Gordo. I think that we're going to make sure that Dr. Emerson talk to you or Mr. Crosby, because right now we are just talking about the map and about the school consolidation. We asked at the beginning of the meeting if you have any requests to ask about it. So, but they will tell you. They will contact you and make sure that you're here.
Okay.
And probably for the next meeting, we will give that information to the public too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gordo. Any other comment regarding the maps? Okay, please.
Hello, Fabiola de la Torre. My question might be very simple, but is this the norm in cities our size to divide the city this way?
Dr. Emerson.
I'm actually going to ask Angela. I think it's is it the norm? I don't know that it would be the norm, but more and more cities and more school districts are being mandated to move from large elections to trustee area elections. That is a trend that is happening.
And it's based on the federal and the state law that you were referring to.
That's
voting
correct.
rights. Okay. Okay, that answers it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Klager. So it is my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the reason that we are transitioning between a at-large election process to a by trustee election process is because it violated the California Voting Rights Act. Is that correct?
Dr. Emerson?
That was an assertion, yes.
Is that assertion correct under the law? And we are now being required by law to transition to a by trustee election process?
I would answer that question, yes.
Okay, so my question, and I apologize if it does kind of deviate back to school consolidation just a little bit, is that why would we have a board make those decisions who were elected under a system that violated the Voting Rights Act when we could instead wait to have representation from each of these different trustee areas, make those decisions at a later date. And I assume that the new trustees would be voted in 2022 with the next election. Is that correct? Is that the correct date? I'm not sure. Yes, so if you could answer that question for me, clear it up for me, because I'm quite concerned and would very much like some explanation on that.
So the answer to your question is that when elections happen, it's at the will of the voters at the time of that election. And 3 of the 5 board members were elected in November of 2020 for terms through November of 2024. And that was at the will of the voters. Going through this process is absolutely critical and crucial now to be properly responsive and compliant with those laws. And it would be more than appropriate and proper for the currently seated board to take that action.
Well, I understand that it's appropriate and legal because you were voted into office in 2020. What I'm asking is if it's moral and ethical when there's a better system on the horizon to have those elected from the trustee area to make those decisions when there's more equitable representation from each of the different school sites or different districts, whatever we decide on that, one of those 4 decisions.
Well, I would just take your comment and just say that I would disagree with We just have a disagreement, that's all.
Okay. I think that doesn't necessarily answer my question, but it is a response to my question. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comment? I'd just like to add, Dr. Emerson and Mercedes, I don't know if it is appropriated during this open public to make a comment? Yeah? Okay, I just want to let you know, the public, that next year we will have elections in two areas in the district. And what we are doing right now, making these decisions, is not something that we came up with. It is something that we have pushed to do it. And it was a legal push. And the city did it before us, and we decided not to continue doing it as soon as the city was doing it, but now we were forced to do it. So it's not just up to us. It is, like I say, right now we had the last elections, like you mentioned, in last 2 years ago? No, last year, 2020, I know. And like next elections are 2022. So 3 of the other board members will stay here, but it's something that if we are here, we are not here just to represent one school. If I run in 2022 and I am elected, I'm not just going to represent the school where I live that is closer to my house. So I just can tell you that I know we're not going to agree 100% in everything, but we are doing what we have to do right now. So at this point, if there is no more any other comments, I will ask a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close.
Moved by Mr. Bell, second.
Second.
Second by Dr. Finlay. I will call by names now. Roll call, Mr. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Carroll.
Yes.
Dr. Finlay.
Yes.
Mrs. Koo is absent, and Reina Diaz, yes. So public hearing is closed. Receive for information, item number 10, the 2021 Educator Effectiveness Plan for Duarte Unified School District. And item 11, adjourn. I need a motion to adjourn in memory of Don Fernando Zuniga, father of Alex, the one who worked at Maxwell School, and also Eddie Zuniga. They both work for our school district. I need a motion to adjourn in memory of Don Fernando.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Carroll.
Second by Mr. Bell.
Second by Mr. Bell. Any discussion? Roll call. Mr. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Carroll.
Yes.
Dr. Finlay.
Yes.
Mrs. Koo is absent, and Reina Diaz, yes. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you.